all of the DPS in 10.2 ranked based on everything that they've done on the PTR in terms of rating. Hundreds of logs have been dissected, tier sets have been looked at, and a bunch of nerfs and buffs have been taken into consideration, but by and large, this is the meta for raids in 10.2 in DPS. So we're gonna start it off really quick with Frost DK. Now, Frost DK is a weird cookie because some people slap with Frost DK and do quite a bit of damage, both in AoE and in single targets, as we did look at both types of fights in this situation. And some people just don't. Some people just really don't. So it leads me to believe that a lot of people are more comfortable, and once everybody kind of knows the playstyle of Frost and probably don't play Obliteration without the legendary weapon, everybody's gonna be doing just fine in Frost. I will put Frost in A tier for awesome, as in you'll do a lot of damage if played correctly. You'll probably not be the best, which is reserved for S tier. And our next competitor, which is Unholy DK, goes straight into S tier. This has been something that I've been contemplating a lot because Unholy is different in the next patch, where it's essentially been nerfed in terms of, you know, Army of the Dead and, you know, the buffs that you get from Power Infusion and all of that. Nerfed as in the overall damage profile has been shifted towards your 45-second cooldown, which I've been saying time and time again with all of this stuff. However, still, it's destroying in a couple of encounters. Dude, the damage is just out of this world, so where else am I gonna put it? It's about 20 to 30 to maybe 40k DPS above the rest in some situations. Even if you're, you know, pumping PIs and stuff into Unholy DK, you can just as well pump in anybody else, but Unholy's just taking that in strides and just destroying it, and I don't know what else to think. I think we just need to wait for 10.2 to come out, man, because I need to test this out. And what better way to wait for 10.2 than by immersing yourself in Final Fantasy XIV Online. As a first-time player, I gotta say, the world is absolutely gorgeous. Walking through the main cities actually made me lose track of time, which hasn't happened for me in a long time. Not to mention, I got to have a lot of fun discovering my Marauder through the story and dungeons, and all of this actually free. That's right, the game is absolutely free until level 70, which gives you access to the base game, A Realm Reborn, and the first two expansions, Heavensward and Stormblood. On top of this, you have access to 16 jobs, which, if you don't know, are the classes you can play, and all on one character with no limited game time. And when you do decide to give it a go, you will get immersed in some of the most beautiful music the gaming world has ever seen, which speaks to the level of passion and love the community has for the game, seen very closely during the European Fan Fest in London 2023, where, as a first-time player and viewer, I was super impressed with Naoki Yoshida, the game director, producer, and designer for Final Fantasy XIV Online, who makes an amazing impression and shows why so many people love the game. Not to mention that the new job they announced looks giga cool. The Viper is exactly how I see myself slicing and dicing big monsters up. You can try Final Fantasy XIV Online for free up to level 70 with no restrictions on game time. Start your free trial by clicking the link in the description. Thank you, Final Fantasy XIV Online, for sponsoring this video. And now, let's talk about Havoc. Havoc is going through the ringer, and however well it's performing in Mythic Plus, because we did do a video on that as well, it doesn't seem to be the case in raids. Now, during the time that pretty much everybody tested the raid with Havoc, where we've received the logs, because, you know, we have to work on data, and Havoc wasn't probably in the best situation, and in some situation was even overpowered, yet still with all of that, its performance has been okay, but nothing to really write home about. Now, it could be, by the way, disclaimer, because I know a lot of people will skip to the end and will not listen to this part, and we'll see them in the comments, won't you? I'll see you in the comments, don't you? Oh, you're gonna be in the comments, won't you? Oh, you're gonna be in the comments, won't you? People might not have figured out the best build to run on Havoc Demon Hunter, and even with Havoc Demon Hunters that I have had in the raids, and when I played as well, it seemed to have quite a little bit of damage potential, so I'm a little bit confused as to why overall I just couldn't figure out why Havoc isn't doing as much damage. It could just be a lack of figuring out the spec, which I definitely see this being A tier if people actually learn to play well, but there's no data for it over 100 logs that I looked at. So what am I gonna do? Well, I'm gonna look at Balanced Druid and happily place it into A tier. Now, I don't know if it's better or not than Frost because it's all over the place. However, Balance seems to be okay. Once again, it's not shining, it's not blowing anybody out of proportions, and its single target is a little bit lackluster. But once you have ads, and you'll have some ads, is doing really well. And even in single target, it seems to be holding its own. With the best of the best, at least it's doing a lot more damage than some other specs, which is pretty great. And weirdly enough, Feral has a very similar performance, but I will put it a little bit in front just to point out that any time I look at a good Feral and a good Balanced Druid, Feral kind of always takes the spot of balance in terms of overall damage that it's doing. In single target at the very least. In AoE it's debatable because in fights like Gnarlroot, which is the first one but also the easiest one, adds all over the place, so it might be harder for Feral to kind of get some damage in until they're grouped, if they will be grouped, and they're all probably going to be grouped once people figure out the strategies. But until then, Feral seems to be doing surprisingly better than Balance overall. However, both of them are in A tier. Similarly to Devastation, this has been actually quite a surprise. Again, also similar to Frost DK, there are people who are destroying with Devastation and people who are not. Now, this is probably the case for the remainder of the specs as well, because I cannot really remember all of them. I have a spreadsheet of over 140 damage parses for all of the specs, and yeah, it's all over the place. However, when you have a consistently good raid group, Devastation seems to be doing really well, which is great because right now it's not that amazing, and seeing it in A tier is probably a pretty joyful thing for a lot of Devastations, because why aren't you playing Augmentation? Listen, Beast Mastery is going to be at the top of A tier, and it's as close to S tier as you can possibly get. It might even get closer to A tier, S tier by the end of the patch, because usually Beastmaster seems to be really good in single target, and that's kind of what you really want. Sure, AoE is great, but single target is, you know, how you kill the encounter, because you need to kill the boss. Now, overall damage is really good. It's not about Unholy and some other people in S tier level, but it's out there. Sad to say, and maybe as a lot of people have expected, marksmanship needs help, like a lot of help. I have seen some good marksmanship do a lot of good damage, but they, as in those really extreme situations, they barely kind of scratch the levels of Havoc, let alone A tier and S tier, and that's only in very fringe situation. And I just see way too many logs with poor performing marksmanships. Now, granted, the good hunters, and this kind of applies to the rest of the specs here, might not be playing marksmanship, or their logs of marksmanship might be hidden that are not accessible to the public. So it might be better than what we see. However, it does seem to be one of the worst performing specs across the board. Maybe it's C, but it's still probably going to be the worst, even if it does end up being C. Survival is, to be fair, it's actually really good in terms of its damage, but once again, it feels like it's around Havoc's level. It's not outshining like the other specs are. Now, I'm not sure if I just didn't find the right people and the right logs to kind of look at exactly what is Survival doing. However, it's okay, and nothing else to say. Arcane is actually a big surprise. Arcane is doing amazing. Now, Arcane is also one of the more difficult rather, specs to play properly, especially when you're expecting new mechanics and new encounters that you don't really know how to juggle around. Arcane finds a way and actually melts meters, which is pretty cool and really nice to see. And we're going to kind of put all of the mages as well. Fire Mage is also really good. Now, I think Fire Mage is probably a little bit better across the board than Arcane, so I'm gonna put it in front just to kind of point that out. It's, once again, it's not blowing us out of the water. It's good. I mean, it's A tier, so it's gonna be pretty good. But the real surprise is definitely Frost, which I think in our Mythic Plus prediction and through the analysis that we did there, Frost was the best mage spec there, and it's the best mage spec here as well, which, yay? Is it time for Frost? Is it Frost time? Frost time, baby. Windwalker. Well, let's see. So B tier specs, where Windwalker belongs as well, are okay specs. They're usually the specs where, oh, come on, can we not be able to compete with the top of the top? Can we please compete with that? and we kind of see pretty much every other balance tuning phase, Windwalker getting some single target love. Like, if not every round, it's every other round you get some sun kick damage. Now, I don't know if that's ever going to help because it hasn't helped in years. It might just be a time for a rework. Now, listen, we can say the same for every other B tier spec, C, and then D as well, because, you know, if Windwalker gets some help, why aren't the other ones as well? But at any other point in time in raid, those other specs have been really good in raids, while Windwalker has been a consistent B across the board, more or less. Not the same for Retribution. Retribution is actually, in some situations, is doing way better than the mages. In some situations, is not. So I don't know where to put it. Listen, it's around there. It's around there. It's a weird cookie to crumble. But in single target, definitely seems to still be kind of an issue for Red. Obviously, its AoE is out of this world. It's a very tanky spec. It's probably one of the biggest reasons why it's still in A tier, because, you know, tankiness definitely helps so you don't die all the time. And the fact that it does have good damage, good utility, it's definitely going to be a valuable spec in the raid. Shadow. Now, at the time of analyzing all of these logs, which are a couple of weeks old, because there haven't been any other testing since, Shadow was S tier, but it has been nerfed quite a bit. And with those nerfs, I don't see it being lower than A tier still. It does provide power infusion, which is still very good, and its damage is still really good if pulled off properly. Now, the nerfs did knock it down a peg. It might be lower than A tier so far, considering how good it was in some of these raid fights. I hardly see the nerfs taken into B tier, but I know Shadow Priests are struggling. I know they've been hit hard, so it might be low, but maybe I'm keeping it in A with a little bit of copium and a little bit of hopium that, you know, it's not gonna go down the shitter. Assassination is kind of seeing a return. It is still B tier with, you know, the specs that are okay, but might need a little bit of help, which is weird because I've tested Assassination a little bit on a training dummy, which I know a training dummy is not like a real boss, which is why that's not why I'm putting Assassination in B, because I would have put it in S. Assassination burst single target damage is crazy, and also locked behind one of the more difficult rotations to pull off, at least in single target. That could explain why Assassination is not destroying, absolutely destroying the meters in the PTRs, possibly also because people haven't figured out the build, but I have a slight inkling that it's A tier, which is why actually it's going to go into A tier, because this is about prediction and not about what the actual data says, because that's just boring, that's just numbers. Outlaw is also really good. It's actually really good, really good. I think it also has been nerfed slightly, which might probably see closer to the end of the A tier, but the A tier nonetheless, I mean, it's doing really good. It's just a solid spec. There's not much to say about it. Obviously, with the Rogue rework, it's been getting some crazy builds that you can definitely test out, and probably we're gonna see exactly which one will perform the best, or maybe we'll have more than just one in the next raid. But so far, it's a safe spec to play if performance is any of your concerns. Similar sub, although seems to be a little bit on the lower end side, considering the sub is actually dominating right now. But isn't that how every patch starts with sub? It's a little bit of like a underdog spec, and then it's like, boom, I'm top dog once again, baby. That's essentially what's up. But indeed, sub has been part of the rework for Rogue. It has been getting buffs, and it's still confusing why it's not topping the A tiers, but it's still A tier, right? It's still better than Havoc, still better than Survival and Windwalker and all of that, which is really good. And Elemental goes into A tier as well, and although not as much, I don't know, I guess I'll leave it behind the Rogues, although I've seen some logs of Elemental doing a lot better than Assassination. Clearly, it's doing really well. It's an A tier spec, it's just hanging out with the best, and it's, well, listen, I don't know how balanced the PTR has been, probably not very balanced, but in terms of raid performance, when I've, you know, came across some good consistent raid groups that just everybody seems to be doing pretty much very high damage, they're very close to each other in terms of overall performance, which is kind of why A tier seems to be so populated this time around. And listen, I could be wrong because, you know, it's a prediction video at the end, but if I'm not, I would be super happy to see so many specs into A tier similar to Enhancement. which I cannot really say much more than I did for Elemental. It's a solid spec. It's doing better. It's doing better. I mean, maybe I can say that, which that's pretty cool. And it's still at the top of the A tier-ish. Now, probably after the Shadow Priest nerfs, it might be a little bit further in front, but then again, it's kind of hard to compete with Priest utility, and you're still a melee at the end, which is not something that raids usually favor, although there are some insane fights, I gotta say, like the ones we tested, the second boss at the very least, because we haven't had the chance to test all of them. For range, you just have to like move a lot, and it might be a little bit better for melee, but we'll see. A happy surprise was definitely Affliction as well, which has been kind of like a A tier as well. It's been like really good actually. Like the damage is really good for Affliction overall in terms of performance, and that's great because we haven't seen Affliction top in the raid meter since BFA. Maybe at the beginning of Shadowlands it was kind of good. I remember the Race World First in Nathria were using some Afflictions, I believe, but it just went downhill since then, and it has been just mediocre since. So yay for Affliction. If you like Affliction, listen, this is the time to go back to it. Now, listen, give me a second. Hot baby, damn, what's going on with demonology, man? Dude, like, I know some of the logs that I looked at definitely had some power infusions, because, you know, demonology likes that, but so does Unholy, and yet still, even with that, even without that, even a single target, even in AoE, demonology has been cranked. It has been nerfed since, but it not enough, I don't think. And it's looking really good, which is kind of like a deja vu, because when we predicted the 10.1 DPS for raids, we've kind of seen Demo pretty high up. I think it might still have been S tier, if not at least A tier, and it really trailed off by the end. But I don't know this time, like the difference is just way too big. It could be external power systems. It's kind of hard to keep track of everybody's buff in like 80 to 100 and something logs that I looked at. So I might have missed some power infusions here and there, but at the end of the day, even with power infusions, so what? Anybody can get power infusions. It just so happened that it's the best on demonology. I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be a good time to be demo, plus with all the little talent changes, which you might be playing Portal still. Although some of the best logs that I've seen with demonology has seen some of the biggest damage sources coming from Felguard, which leads me to believe that maybe the best talent setup might not be another Portal, because PTR unfortunately logs like 2 out of 3 times don't show talents at all, so I have no idea what talents were used. Although you can probably see Pitlord damage, but that wasn't it, baby. That was just Felguard. Destruction has fallen, not as much as marksmanship, but has fallen quite a bit, where maybe just people didn't play Destruction whatsoever and they just went straight to Demo, because Demo is just cooler. And Destruction with Dimensional Rift, I mean, playstyle is cool, but the damage is not impressive whatsoever, and the builds that you're kind of forced into to get Dimensional Rift kind of suck, for me at the very least. But it's not about me here, it's about the prediction, and I predict Destruction to be It's gonna be fun to see if I'm wrong. Arms Warrior is seeing a resurgence, baby. It's doing pretty good. It's actually doing a lot of damage. When Arms is going good, it's going good. It's kind of almost never number 1 in DPS, but it's definitely number 2s and number 3s, and that's kind of where you'll probably expect to play Arms. Now, Arms tier set has been kind of funky, which is why some of the logs have been pretty poor for Arms, and I believe in the first batch of the raid testing, when I tested Arms as well, the tier set wasn't even working properly. My Thunderclap was not coming out whenever I was executing, and stuff was overridden, so that was my experience, which kind of discouraged me from playing Arms. But ever since, people have been doing really good with Arms, similar with Fury. Now, I kind of want to put Fury in front, but some of the best logs for both Arms and Fury kind of saw Arms a little bit ahead. But then again, you know, Fury kind of always picks up by the end of the raids here, which is something that I'm not necessarily going to be surprised about. But Fury also received a change to Reckless Abandon, which kind of, I don't know if it's a nerf, because Reckless Abandon definitely works well with the tier set, where you're just going to be spamming Bloodthirst and Rampages and Odin's Fury here and there. And if I recall, the last change to Reckless Abandon buffed 1 less Bloodthirst and Raging Blow, but the tier set did change to also affect Raging Blow so as to not force you to just play Bloodthirst. Now, I think that just happened after the majority of people have tested the raid already, so I don't know if we have enough good logs with that, and that might see Fury a little bit higher, probably quite a few slots higher, but until then, we're gonna have to see, because seriously, it's kind of boring for Fury, I'm not gonna lie. And last but not least, Augmentation. Now, you might think this is an S tier spec, and in that case, you might be wrong, because it's not. Listen, it's no denying that Augmentation is actually really good. It is an A tier spec because, well, it just so happens that when you log with Augmentation, all the buffs that you give to everybody are kind of calculated into your own performance, and with that being said, it's an A tier spec. It's doing as much damage, or it's contributing with as much damage to the raid as everybody else, obviously from the top logs, because, you know, it kind of depends how the people that you are buffing are playing their specs and how good they are playing those specs. Then again, Augmentation definitely works better with some specs than others, and considering that PTR testing is very limited, maybe the best combinations with Augmentations haven't been actually tested, so it could just be better than that. But hey, A tier, still pretty good, and, you know, it's probably better than Devastation, which is probably everything that you need to know if you were playing Evoker. But it is S tier, or is it? In our Mythic Plus prediction video, which you can check right here, where, similar to the raid, although I would probably stake more of my money on the Mythic Plus side of things, this will at least give you a rough estimate as to what we think these DPS will be looking like in 10.2. So check the Mythic Plus one as well.